As I walked through the door, I met Phil Fox, the founder of the company, who was in long-term recovery himself from heroin addiction. And he was an interesting character. And I remember us kind of looking cagely at each other. I was sort of newly arrived to London, and he was looking to see if I was this fresh intern from Central who would be offering my skills to support what he was doing. But I remember being in that workshop space that was kind of part rehab, part creative workshop, and that feeling of sense of kind of warmth from the workshop environment that I experienced that evening that kind of stayed with me and has influenced how I think about how we create spaces of creative activity with people. But Phil Fox was an interesting character. He was a talented writer and director. As I say, was in addiction recovery, and so very much relied and used and infused his recovery practices into the way that he directed and facilitated theatre. I mean, it was quite an interesting, eclectic group of people. It wasn't always easy. I mean, there were sometimes disagreements. It was kind of but there was a sense of understanding each other and working together through disagreements and through the challenges of putting on a show around addiction. But what Phil shared with me was that, and showed me, was that theatre, drama very much saved his life. And that sounds a bit dramatic, but for him, creative activity was an essential part of his recovery practice. By making theatre, by being creative, that helped him to make sense of the world around him. It helped to express some of the difficult things, the feelings and the act out sometimes, things that he needed to get out of his system. And so for him, theatre was such a huge important part of his recovery practice. And he believed that it was probably an essential part of other people's own recovery practice too. So while I was working with Outside Edge, I was able to witness the powerful impact of performance work with, by, and for people affected by addiction. I was involved in a wide range of types of work. So that's I was doing weekly improv workshops with people in early stage recovery. I was devising shows with our advanced group that might go on in sort of the off West End theatres in London. I was taking touring shows to rehabs and prisons across the UK, and I even did a tour with school Peace for School age children in schools. So we had quite a range of types of work that we did, and some of it was about making innovative theatre work with people who had a particular lived experience, and sometimes it was using that performance practice, drama, improv to help people in supporting their processes of recovery, supporting them connecting with pro-social like-minded people, but also helping them to express themselves creatively as well. As with many small theatre companies, I did a variety of job roles. So I've been creative producing, I'd be sorting the props, I'd be hiring venues, directing, inventing new projects, and then eventually I became the artistic director of the company when Phil passed away. However, when my son was born, I decided to step away from Outside Edge and pursue another dream I had of doing a PhD. I was fortunate to be awarded a full-time scholarship with the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama, and this gave me the opportunity to take that time to really examine the kinds of performance practices that I'd been involved in. Whenever you're working in a theatre company, it's busy, you're constantly doing the work, or you're doing the activities that generate the income to do the work. And so I hadn't had that chance to take stock of what is this niche type of practice? Is it niche? Are there other people doing this work? And so being able to do a PhD helped me to step back and observe what was happening across the UK at the time. And last year, for instance, sort of jumping on from that years later, recently, last year, I created a report on recovery arts for the Bearing Foundation, which is called Creatively Minded and in Recovery, and it's available on their website, and it's a very kind of user-friendly review of what is recovery arts. When I was writing it, I realised that much of my PhD research at the time was contributing to a growing appreciation of recovery arts as a distinct field of arts practice. That when I began my PhD studies, it was a kind of little known field. There were maybe 4 main organizations that kind of knew each other. And as I was writing the report, I realized that in a sense I was kind of housing in my head the historiography of this movement that was essentially word of mouth in a kind of under the radar community of arts practitioners that kind of knew each other but weren't quite collaborating with each other at that point. But at the point of last year when writing the report, I realized that we had now moved further through this formation in 2022 of the addiction recovery arts movement that I launched at the University of West London to the creation of the Performing Recovery magazine, which is now online and visible internationally. And so the Bering report had 15 case studies of different types of arts practices specifically engaged with addiction recovery. And that was just a selection from a growing directory of arts organisations. So it was really interesting for me to take stock of where I was in 2016 when I began my PhD to now this kind of visible movement of recovery arts. So the book. The book draws upon some of my PhD studies, but it was published last year. So it also contains added material that I've been gathering and analysing more recently. It's largely aimed at arts practitioners and people studying performance, so it does have a lot of language that is aimed at the way in which we talk about performance practice. It also offers a kind of philosophy of what it means to be in recovery. But I feel that there are elements useful to anyone who's interested in processes of recovery, particularly the chapters that address things like using objects or engaging with place or thinking about liminal atmospheres or community are kind of themes that are useful to think about for anyone who's engaging in creating any kind of environments that support recovery, whatever type of recovery it might be. So Messy Connections is the title, creating atmospheres of recovery through performance practice. Messy connections was a phrase I started to use during my PhD and when I was trying to describe the experience of addiction, recovery, the sensorial element of it, as well as the sensorial element of performance making, as well as the way in which people connect to recovery community and arts organisations in this field could connect with each other, as well as to recovery community. Messy was an important term though, and I know it can be quite a loaded term when you're referring to addiction, but I don't necessarily mean the messiness of a high or using, but what messy is for me in terms of the theories I've drawn from is it's a kind of code for bodily sensation, that feeling orientated experience of addiction, the way in which when you're in addiction or in recovery, you have that bodily sensations, whether it's emotion-based or whether it's the kind of desire to use or whatever those difficult bodily sensations might be. But also from a research point of view, it also relates to the unpredictable. So when you're gathering this research or when you're trying to document this type of practice, when you're doing it and creating it, there is always in creative practice that idea of the elusive element of the not yet. We tend to, in theatre making, we talk about the not yet or the in-between, the liminal state of creating something. So when you're creating a performance, you don't know what it's going to be until it's made. And likewise, it relates really nicely to in recovery. There is a liminal state of process of ongoing, never fully complete change. And I say never fully complete because in recovery circles, people tend to think about recovery as an ongoing process. There's not an end product, there's not a destination. It's an ongoing commitment to practices of adopting new ways of being in the world that are less harmful. So that's where messy comes in. in terms of addiction, I don't use an idea of addiction in terms of medical or scientific models in the book, because again, that's not the area of research that I'm in, although I do draw from psychology at times. But what I'm doing in the book is I'm emphasizing the sensorial experience of both addiction and recovery as an assemblage. So what I'm looking at is trying to describe, what does it mean? What is the kind of existential state of being in recovery? And how does performance practice map onto that idea of interactions with people, places, and things? So people, places, and things is a phrase often used in recovery circles. And of course, for those who are familiar with the recent West End stage play, it's also now the title of Duncan Macmillan's play that's been quite well received. But it's when we think philosophically of how we experience the world, it is through a series of sensorial interactions, or what sometimes I refer to as affective interactions, with elements of our surroundings. And that has features like objects, place, social cultural practices, and so on. So if we think of addiction as a sensorial experience, then Cameron Duff's idea of addiction is as an assemblage. In his book, Assemblages of Health, what he talks about is the idea of, if we appreciate somebody's experience of well-being or addiction as a series of interactions within space, time, objects, and we see how they interact with each other, then we get a better sense of what someone's experiencing, and then a better sense of how to help support recovery or even reveal what's going on. And that relates really nicely to the way in which we think about performance as an assemblage of objects and bodies on stage, and light and sound and so on. There's a lovely little quote from Duncan Macmillan's play that I want to share with you. It's the lead character, Emma, who says, "They tell you in rehab, avoid people who make you want to relapse, places you associate with using, and objects that might be a trigger. People, places, and things. That's basically, everything." And I quite like this because it's quite true in terms of thinking about what are the difficulties around recovery. Because if you are to avoid people, places, and things, sometimes that's just simply not possible, because those people might be family, the things or the places might be in your head. They might, if you're thinking in terms of sometimes through traumatic experience and memory. So it's not always possible to completely avoid supposed triggers. And also, it's perhaps unfair to assume that recovery is a completely individual, is completely the responsibility of the individual, when we think that sometimes there are things going on in society around us that provide particular challenges for individuals. And we can also talk about things like race, class, gender, disability, all of those other elements that can create additional barriers to living well. So Duff's suggestion is that as a society, we can support recovery, whether it be through addiction or mental well-being or from a specific trauma, by creating atmospheres that are conducive to recovery. And he provides an example in his book about a well-being cafe that created a safe space of connection, of community for people. In my book, what I do is I illustrate how arts activity, that's either through creative projects, participatory projects, or even live theatre performance, it's a way that you can create an atmosphere of recovery, whether it's through the way in which you're nurturing interactions in the creative experience, or simply through representations that are happening on stage that challenge stigma, or that create awareness. It kind of creates an atmosphere that supports a rethinking of what addiction is. Overall, the book documents and discusses examples of arts practice, including my own, and offers an understanding of what I refer to as a recovery-engaged ethos of practice. So if anything, what I'm doing and what I'll talk about later is I kind of offer ways of thinking and doing practice that are recovery-engaged. So infused with an understanding of survival from difficult experience, and adapting a new approach, a new way of thinking and relating to the world around you. So each chapter addresses a particular feature of the creative experience that either supports processes of recovery, or it might reveal narratives of survival that can challenge stigma, raise awareness, and so better promote understanding of factors that contribute to addiction and pose barriers to recovery. For instance, chapters 1 and 2 document the process of collaborative theatre making in my own theatre practice. And I mentioned these chapters because I think it's useful to highlight one particular thing I discuss in my book is an observation of how the performers, whenever I was priming and facilitating the creative process, had a particular attunement with each other. They'd shared insights were informed by challenges of addiction, of processes, on even languages of recovery, shared rituals. They may have had very different experiences, be very different types of people, but there seemed to be that common thread of recovery, community, or language that bonded them together. And by facilitating as the theatre maker, the director, this experience in a careful manner, working alongside them, so not imposing my viewpoints, but getting to know them and working alongside them, creating a safe and creative space. I observed how the theatre making process generated an atmosphere of recovery. Currently, I'm also interested in how this way of working can be adapted to other groups, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when I move on at the end to talk about my latest foray into working with military veterans in my latest project. What I'd like to share with you is from chapter 2, how I discuss how objects can be used as a creative device, not only in supporting storytelling, but how they can reveal insights and challenge assumptions. Because sometimes it's useful to have a device. And also in the creative practice, it was useful to see how we can have a particular relationship with an object. So in one piece I was creating with a person about their autobiographical experience, we were able to, through performing with certain kinds of objects that would have been problematic or associated with drug use, by kind of playing with them in the creative space, he was able to develop a different and more playful relationship with it and move beyond that. But the example I want to share with you is how, rather than thinking of the human as performer, how the objects performed. And this is what I'm describing, a kintsugi project by Portraits of Recovery. For those not familiar with kintsugi, it's the Japanese art of repair. When an object is broken, that you can repair it, keeping the scars, but using, usually it's using gold, but in the case of this project, it was using anything to kind of show that there had been a repair, but creating a work of art from it. And I thought it was a really lovely metaphor for recovery. So I'm just going to share a little bit from the book with you. And it also gives you an example of how I kind of use thick description sometimes to describe the performance practice that I'm trying to document. 2 days before the tea parties held to celebrate the Queen's Platinum Jubilee bank holiday weekend of June 2022, the decorative scars of the bone china teacups, saucers and plates collated for the repair centre were exhibited to the public at the Manchester Craft and Design Centre. These pieces of crockery unashamedly displayed their golden or multicoloured joins. The fracture lines of 2 plates in particular captured my attention as I noticed the pieces of paper wedged in the gold embossed cracks, offering words of provocation such as needless, overload, ally, and fortune. While I can't tell what these words mean in a linguistic context, it's the gesture emerging from the site of brokenness that sticks with me. Portraits of Recovery's pop-up exhibition at the Manchester Craft and Design Centre, so that was May and June 2022, offered members of the general public the opportunity to view and touch artworks created by participants in the Repair Centre project. During this participatory art project, people with lived experience of recovery engaged in workshops, talks, and artistic collaboration with professional artists. The objects collated for the Repair Centre had a vibrant materiality, an agency in their own right, capable of evoking an effective response from the human viewer. Harris and Holman Jones, in their book Queer Life of Things, reminds us that objects are transistors that not only preserve memories from the past, but can make new impressions in the present. In particular, when objects challenge us to attune differently with them, they become an orientating force by which we might see them as if for the very first time. This has powerful resonances with practices of recovery in that, as discussed in previous chapters, recovery from addiction requires a reorientation of past relations with the surrounding environment to develop these less harmful ways of being. The plates used by the repair centre and the items of upcycled clothing and other mended objects call on us to attune differently, to see anew these objects that might have been previously discarded as imperfect or irreparable. These reimagined objects operate as transistors of lived experience of recovery, both literally in terms of their own repair and also metaphorically in relation to their encounter with the human being in addiction recovery who interacted with the object to create the artwork. Elaine Scarry's seminal book, The Body in Pain, highlights the difficulty in sharing the experience of pain in that it resists objectification and language. There are no words that can completely and accurately share the felt intensity of pain. Likewise, the felt experience of lived experiences of recovery from addiction resists translation into spoken word. Artistic expression, however, assists through its liminal state to generate a valence of feeling that might better express the texture of these lived experiences. In the Repair Centre project, objects were the storytellers. They claimed agency in becoming the narrators of a display of experiences of trauma, healing, and acceptance. So, this example shares the kinds of observations that I make about practice and offer to creative practitioners and thinking about how to work but also the ways in which performance can reveal narratives of addiction recovery and help us to rethink maybe our assumptions around what we think about processes of recovery or people in addiction recovery. But there is also a recurring theme in that example that also occurs throughout the book, and that involves a shift in identity, specifically from the former addict self to the who am I in recovery, who am I past whatever the difficult experience was in my life. And certainly with some of the PhD candidates I work with who are doing auto and ethnographic work, they might be doing something similar. That might be other types of difficult lived experience, and they're using performance to really reimagine, reinvent who they are, what their relationship with themselves and with the world around them in the present, and maybe even think about in the future. So within a supportive recovery engaged atmosphere, participants in some of these arts practices can formulate new ideas and new possibilities that then can translate beyond the creative process into their lives. So this leads me to my latest project, which focuses on music making with military veterans. It began as a small project, which we ran at the University of West London last summer. I'd been in conversation with Sean Johnson, who's a veteran who's involved in On Parade and is involved in a lot of other veterans arts organisations. And I discussed with him this idea of a music project. And he had spoken to me about this, that there would be a real need and desire for some form of music making project amongst the veteran community. And so I thought about how we could use their facilities at the London College of Music, which is the department that I'm in within UWL, and how we might create a project. I also had been discussing at the same time ideas around a new music project with a colleague of mine, Greg Smith, who is a lecturer in electronic music production, and he's also responsible for the development of our new Townsend studio, which houses the vintage synth collection that Pete Townsend has loaned to the university. We'd also viewed a video of on the On Parade website of a veteran called Jimmy Micklefield, who was sharing his love of electronic music production and DJing. And so from that, we were inspired to think about how we might create a music project that was based in the Townsend studio, that it was around electronic music production that might relate to veterans who were interested in dance music or electronic music. So what we ended up doing was we developed two strands of activity. We had playing in the band for the likes of the singer-songwriter types who want to just jam in a band with others or share the songs they've written. And also we had a strand which was electronic dance music production for the likes of Jamie who are into the electronic sounds and dance music. Those that took part in the pilot really enjoyed it. They say it seems to have a really positive impact on them. For instance, one of the things we observed, there was a participant who's now going to be involved in our second version as a mentor, and he made this discovery throughout the process where he'd had a lot of physical physical pain difficulties, mobility difficulties in his hands and his arms, and through jamming and being part of a musical group, he started playing the piano for the first time in about 7 or 8 years. And it seemed like he had a new lease of life. And he was already a prolific creator of music, but he's now got a new zeal. He's happier. He's really excited about being involved in a new part of the project. And so it was really lovely seeing how the impact of the pilot had such a hugely positive resonance for him, both in terms of his music creativity, but just in his sense of well-being. The pilot was also a chance for me to adapt my recovery engaged approach to creative practice. So that idea again of working alongside a community, getting to know them, but also thinking about what are the ways in which creating that safe space with like-minded community through creative project can actually have a positive impact for those involved. And it was really great that the participants involved in the pilot were so generous, sharing their insights, sharing their experiences from their perspective from veteran community of how they relate to group activity, what would work, what wouldn't. And so it was really great to kind of work along with them to get a sense of how we might do this project that would be useful and actually be able to be sustainable beyond the initial project. Thanks to the Poppy Factory, we were invited to submit a bid for inclusion in their Thrive Together initiative, which is funded by the British Government. And the director, Debbie, had come to see the Veterans Art Showcase that I had hosted at UWL in January. And seeing some of the interviews and that some of the veterans have participated in for our documented video, she felt that the music project really deserved to happen again, but in a more expanded way. So it was great to be included in part of their London Region programme of activities for the Thrive Together initiative. So we are in the process of recruiting for that now. This version will involve 10 sessions in person at the University of West London, and then 8 sessions online with Company of Makers. So again, part of that project is also expanding it to collaborate with other organisations, arts organisations who work with veterans. And it's great that Company of Makers are joining us and collaborating with us in this. To see how we can expand the project so that it's not just happening in a kind of short window of time, but also thinking about what is that continuity, because I'm very aware that from what I've been told in veteran community, that idea of community, of familial bonding and being able to feel connected with like-minded others is so important, that having a short project that just starts and that's it, gone, is kind of really insufficient in doing what we wanted to do, which is to have a continuing positive impact on people's lives. So the way we've designed it is to try to find a way of creating a community that will start in person, but will continue online, and who knows where it will go. That will create a welcome space for new participants. And co-initiative is key. So we also have a mentorship program where we have mentors who have come from the pilot, and then in the next cycle next year, it will be mentors that will come from this cycle that then can support the creation of that safe space, and also help us to facilitate the right kinds of environment and interactions for this project. So as I discussed earlier, I know the positive impact of creative activity. I've seen it for myself in my own work and in the research that I've done, especially with like-minded community. And as I said, that idea of attunement with each other, that's so important. But this time it'd be hosted in a music studio environment in a university. So I'm really curious to see that kind of interaction between the veteran community and our kind of civilian university community life. I know it's going to be fun. It'll be hopefully cathartic, enhance well-being, and support maybe transition for some people who are transitioning to civilian life in those early stages, or transitioning to being budding artists or music creators, who knows? But most importantly, helping people connect to a new social group that will hopefully continue beyond the project. So in a way, the project, I'm hoping, is for me an experiment in and how to support recovery or transitioning or whatever is relevant within veteran community using music making practice. So if you're interested, then please do sign up, and I'm sure we can provide details of the sign up form at a later date. But that's all for me right now. So back to Steve.
Gosh, Cathy, thank you so much for that. There was so much in there, and I'm not entirely where to start, but I think one of the things that struck me with all of this, and it was quite, because we came to the showcase event that you had at UWL after the first pilot, and it was very interesting to see the energy levels, which is excitement combined with terror, I think is the best way to describe it. Now, obviously getting on stage and performing comedy, music, theatre, whatever it is not necessarily an easy thing at the best of times. So how do you get people who may have some challenges in their life to think, I want to get up on stage, I want to be the next Jimi Hendrix or Laurence Olivier, whoever it is? I'm showing my age there, but I think, how do you do that? How do you get people on board, and also to engage with the program in a way that's productive, if that's the right phrase?
Well, we don't force it for a start.
Yeah.
I think the offering there, so with the pilot, the offering was to do a gig in Freddie's, which is our student union bar named after Freddie Mercury. And but what we found was that there were some up for it and some not so up for it. So it's kind of committing to the process of making music together is the important thing, and the community. And then once you've been working on something for a while, you do want to share it. But we kind of removed the pressure where it became a kind of low key. It's not a big gig. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but it's let's, in the bar, they had a few beers and sit around with their friends or whoever they wanted to be there and just share what they'd been working on, and even have a sing along at one point. For those who are doing the electronic music production strand, they were able to share something that they had already pre-recorded. We're also aware of the different types of personalities we're working with. So the people who join the playing in a band might be the more kind of sociable, like more up for performing. Those who produce electronic music are even, within those communities tend to be more reclusive's not the right word, but they do tend to be maybe shyer or less gregarious. And so then we make the sharing whatever is appropriate to them. Do they want to pre-record something and share it? That's fine. So that idea of co-initiative is really important. We go on a journey. You arrive to us, we create a space that feels comfortable. So I'm not a music specialist, but my job is about creating the space. So we have check-ins. This time around, we're going to be providing lunch. So we're creating those social spaces, and we hang out, we chat, we do some creative activity. My colleagues, Jez, he's very skilled musician. He's played in, he's been a drummer in Hamilton and for the stage production. He's worked with a lot of musicians. He is very used to just working with whatever you bring to the space. So it's not even about being an expert. He will croon along to a tune with you. It's about just coming to the space and having fun, because it's the having fun that's important. But what I did learn and observe was that, I suppose it can relate to other communities, but within the veteran community, that need to want to get it right, and that kind of maybe like perfectionism. So that's also part of the learning process. Is it's all right if it's not perfect, because life isn't perfect. It's about enjoying and doing the good enough in order to enjoy the process. And so sometimes maybe that's a learning process, to just let go and relax and enjoy, and not necessarily have to strive to have to get it 100% right, because it's creative activity. It doesn't matter in the end, really. It's not like some sort of vital, thing. So so it's about celebrating connection and having a bit of fun. And it's through that, I think, is where it has the positive well-being impact, because by having fun and being with a supportive group and maybe having a disagreement and learning to get past it and negotiate that and build social resilience for those people who maybe have had some really unpleasant mental health experiences that they're moving beyond. So that idea of creating social resilience is something that we have to work with our own creative students as well. And so so it's kind of that sticky, messy, complicated process that's just really about having fun.
About having fun. So,
Yeah.
and I agree with all of that, but I've got a question. So obviously,
Yes.
so when you're playing in a group of people, whether whether you're playing with a tambourine or playing guitar, you're in the same room. You could literally hit a table and you can participate in music, holding a beat or what have you. When you're creating electronic music, usually it's, as you've already alluded to, it's one person glued to the screen, probably more akin to programming, I guess, in a lot of people's eyes, but not necessarily, depending on the genre of music. There was when I came to visit you and saw the studio, which, if anybody gets the chance to go and see, is well worth seeing, by the way. I was struck by the ideas that were being discussed about how you can jam, for want of a better phrase, and collaborate in the room using electronic and using computers as the core music making instrument. Do you
Yeah.
want to talk a little bit about that?
I can try to, but I can just imagine my colleague Greg cringing as I get it wrong,
He's
because
not
he's the
here. He's not
expert.
here. So go for
He's
it.
not here. Yes. Yeah, so he does, he's very much interested, particularly in creating neurodiverse friendly approaches to music making. So a lot of the students that we have, well, a significant proportion, we now have students who are neurodiverse. That's particularly, we're thinking about ADHD. So tends to be correlation with people doing electronic music production and ADHD. Also people who might be on the autistic spectrum. And so they have particular talents and sensitivities and skill that lend themselves well to those processes. However, there are also complications and difficulties around how you might interact within that social space.
Yeah.
So Greg's really interested in thinking about how do we use devices to kind of jam together or to provide more of an interactive experience. So when you go into the Townsend studio, for instance, it's not like a classroom. It is like a kind of, I don't know, I kind of tease my joke about it kind of being some kind of one of those kind of tech media creative spaces that you might see in East London, where it's got the wooden tables and it's got the plants and everything, but it's deliberately low lighting and a kind of soft feeling, so that it's a different, more relaxed sensory experience, which is much more conducive to a positive experience for people who've maybe had negative experiences around institutional experience and contexts. But also it's got lots of synths, and increasingly we now have a coordinator, Theo, who's brilliant, who's learning how to showcase what some of the synths can do. So it means that you can interact with these ancient, so when I say ancient, 60s, 70s vintage synths. And then in the middle of the room, Greg, with the veterans, and the room was only in development at the time, so they didn't get to fully experience it at the time. But in the middle, there's the kind of modern, it's essentially a computer and the software that they operate with. But what you can do is once you've learned the software, play with the software, but also look at these vintage synths and play with those and how do they interact with each other? How do you might create sound loops? So it becomes more tactile and interactive. But the jamming and DJ involve some sort of gadget with buttons. I know I don't know. I know he's going to be rolling his eyes at me. But what it meant was actually gain tactile.
He did ask me to ask you this question deliberately to see it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. But it did involve kind of DJing, pressing buttons and DJing sound together and jamming. So there are ways in which you can use devices that can encourage people who would normally do this on their own in their bedroom or their shed or wherever, and just, work on a program to actually interact and jam with each other or play sounds or loop sounds. And there might be other ways in which we can build collaboration, because I think I think there are two elements to that, the EDM strand, which is it is useful. That kind of solo creative activity is really useful to some people. So Jamie would say that when he does that work, it gets him out of his head, out of the negative things of his head or the things that stress him, because it takes so much focus. So that solo focus is important, and Greg will train people how to use those softwares. But also developing collaborative social elements is so important, particularly for people who tend to be a little bit too solo and need to be gently teased into, be part of a community. Even with the online stuff, whenever we've been talking when it moves over to Company of Makers, that idea of how do we create an online community where you might be creating work on your own, but you come together and you talk about it and you develop it further or build a collaboration. So it's, yeah. Have I answered that question
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I think that'll do. But there
That's
then,
the non-technical version.
Yeah, that's the technical version. But basically, what you're saying then, it is possible to jam and collaborate in the room using a computer. And I guess the advantage of a computer as an instrument is most people have got one, of course. So these days, it's actually quite easy to access, and you can probably get some half decent sounds out of it quicker out of a computer than you will out of a guitar, because that is actually, like, if you've never played, obviously can be quite challenging. So that's great. We've got a question here from Mac, who says, how long was the pilot music program?
6 weeks. Too short, really. Yeah.
So
6 weeks.
How long have you, aside from the online stuff that we can talk about, how long is it going to be now?
10.
Wow, okay, it's a lot more, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Because first week it takes, you're kind of becoming accustomed to the way of working with the group and establishing yourself as a group. And so we do need to allow longer for the creative process. And the storming bit of group formation, where it's kind of, we don't know what we're going to do, or what are the challenges that we need to overcome to get to wherever it is that you want to do. So we thought 10 weeks would give it. When I say 10 weeks, it's a Friday afternoon. So it's 10 Fridays. 10 Friday afternoons should give longer for the process. I felt that the group, whenever we were finished, that was the first piece of, like, the feedback at the end. It was, this needs to be longer. We need more time.
So in terms then of the people that have done the pilot, what are they doing now? I mean, I know a couple of them become mentors, but have they gone into some other form of performing arts, or are they now all on stage every night? What's happened to them?
Not quite. I mean, it was so short, they wouldn't have really had the opportunity. So the 4 from the original group are going to be mentors. Of those, 2 of them happen to work together, and so which is why I have some of those anecdotal stories of how it's really positively impacted them. And they've been collaborating together outside, which they would not have done before. They wouldn't have been involved in music making together, but because they've created that bond during the process, and they've got over this like fear of sharing and collaborating
Yeah.
music. One particular veteran got over his fear of live performance. So, as you were kind of alluding to that idea of how do you get them to perform, the challenge for him, so the goal for him, which we'd set at the beginning because that was part of what he'd wanted to achieve, was to share a song that he had written.
Right.
So he did that, but with the security of having the rest of the group around him singing along with him. So he's keen to do more of that. Jamie, who does the electronic music production, has been full steam ahead, creating loads more work. And yeah, so I think what we've done is we've sparked the kind of the creative zeal to do music making.
Yeah.
And that's why it's important then with this new version of the project, with the 8 lines, with 8 weeks, 8 sessions with company of makers, it's that idea of how do we help people to sustain that. So instead of just having like a creative intervention and that's it, how do you then develop a community and develop a practice that continues beyond us? And then hopefully, set up their own thing, which would be great. I'm
Yeah.
very much, in favor of people going off and with having had our support, going off and doing their own thing that
So
carries
also
on.
in terms of the online stuff, 'cause we've talked about this, haven't we, at
Mhm.
length? And I think what are we going to do in the online side of things isn't entirely clear yet until we know what the group's
Yeah.
interested in. So it will be, I hope, will be shaped by what the group does face to face, what they've
Yeah.
learned, what they found interesting, who they can work with, what they've felt the challenges are, um, of collaborating. Because all good bands bust up, don't they? After all said and done, wouldn't be a good band if they don't.
Yeah, well.
So, what do you see the future of this then? Because obviously this is kind of like a fuller fat version of what you tried last year. It's obviously been successful. What would you like to see this project doing, or would like it to become in, I don't know, 3 to 5 years, something like that?
I'd like it to be ongoing. I think it's up to, I'm excited to see who our new people, our new participants, what they do with it. Because what we can do is provide, due to the kind of structures and limitations of the university, in the sense of that we are teaching students most of the year and so on. But there's only so much we can do. But what we can do is have a kind of brief intervention to support people in providing access to facilities they might not necessarily get, setting them off on the journey, and then seeing where it goes. So I'd like to see things almost like a ripple effect happen of
Mm,
new projects run by veterans for veterans, particularly with the mentorship training element of this happening wherever. Maybe even inspire people in a different part of the UK to go, oh, and have some copycat versions happening. I don't have a problem with copycats. I think it's the greatest form of flattery, because it isn't about me owning something or us owning a project. It's about we have the capacity and means to do something here and now to inspire and maybe have a positive input to a particular community and then let them run with it, which I also know veterans are very good at doing.
mm.
And that's great. So we can support that, then that's brilliant. And in terms of my own research at UWL, I will be documenting this process and hopefully sharing that with other arts practitioners, because I do think there is a difficulty with arts practitioners working within veteran community and getting it wrong. And so if there's any way that I can support the development of an understanding, as you know yourself, the amount of expertise you have in this and the things that you've learned in terms of how to support working with a particular community that is effective and not causing harm or frustration and annoyance is very useful. So as a kind of arts researcher, that's what I can do in terms of offering advice and frameworks to the arts practitioner community.
Do you think you'll do another one of those, what's the phrase, knowledge transfer that you did last year, as that
Mhm.
might include some of this research and outcomes and perhaps performance from this project?
Yes, might have like a knowledge kind of exchange type activity. I know one of our group has great plans for us to create an album. But I'm scared to say that because who knows? But who knows, because it could be that, we have after 2 cycles, lots of material where we have an album that then can generate, I don't know, a charity thing or who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows? Watch this space.
Finding the pennies, isn't it? Mac also
Yeah.
says Glastonbury next year. I don't know if that's for
Um,
me and Cathy or whom. I wouldn't recommend it. Um, but yeah, I think it's really encouraging. I must admit, we do hear a lot of um all these things that people would have done when they were younger, probably before they joined the service. But like, is it Sir Ken Robinson said that the education system is designed to educate out creativity.
yeah, of
So
course.
we've all heard this story.
Yeah.
You don't want to be an artist, you need to get a proper job, whatever
Yeah.
form of art we're talking about. And I think we hear a lot of, oh, I did that before, when I was at school or when I was younger,
Mm.
and now I'd like to get back into it. I guess that's the kind of people you might be interested in talking to, is it?
Absolutely. It was really interesting how whenever we were working with the pilot group, it would be only by week 3 or 4 there'd be little stories coming out, which is so why it's that my job is really the creating the social environment to try to get the stories out of people where somebody go, oh yeah, I played saxophone in school till such and such a level of skill. And you go, oh really? You've kept that quiet. Or some, oh yeah, I could play the drum. And so yeah, I think it is great to provide that opportunity where people can go back to whatever their youth, if they were a secret electric guitar player in the bedroom when they were a teenager, whatever it was, and to have a chance to reignite that and get a bit of support from our staff to kind of upskill themselves and go on a kind of journey of discovery, of kind of rediscovering their creativity. I really do think that creativity is really important.
Mm.
I'm not going to lecture about the need for arts education, but I think that it is a shame how, that is usually one of the first elements of the curriculum that are cut whenever there's any kind of budget cuts. But actually, the way in which we heal in society, the way we make sense of the world is through creative activity. And even if it's not something we do for a job, I think having that as an outlet is really good for our well-being, good for our keeping our brains young. Yeah, so if we can do that, it doesn't really matter if somebody's wanting to go on and be an artist, but if it becomes something that they do in their spare time that just helps them decompress or whatever it is, then that's really important.
100% agree with that. I think there couldn't be anything better than learning to play guitar or an instrument in your later years, because I think
Yeah.
you really do have to concentrate. The fingers are not as dexterous as they
But
used.
there's science behind that as well because apparently increases neuroplasticity. You're creating new synaptic connections, keeps your brain young. So there you go.
Okay, I better start strumming some of these guitars that I've got back there then.
Mm. So for
So one,
anyone who's experienced even like post-traumatic stress, trying to create new synaptic connections around positive, good feeling activities should be something that's actually a real positive strand to your life.
you heard it here first, boys and girls. I think yes, I'd agree with that. I would agree with the whole thrust. Otherwise, we wouldn't be working together, would we,
Yes.
Cathy? But anyway, I think it's a really exciting project. So, if there's anybody out there listening to this or sees the recording afterwards, how do they find out more? Or are they just going to email me? I'm quite happy for them to do that, and I can obviously pass them on.
Um, can we put a sign up form somewhere, a link to the sign up form? Where would that be?
I
Um,
do not know. I'm sorry. I don't. So let me just, because obviously with the recording,
yeah,
so if people want to email me to find out more, it's
yeah.
steve@companyofmakers.com, and I can obviously forward your email on to Cathy if you're happy for me to
Yeah, and
do
we
so.
also have on the LCM Live Insta account, we have a video which has the sign up form link on it and the that you can access that there as well.
Okay. So people email me, we can send you links, we can send you videos. There will be some way of finding out. If this is in the recording after we finish this tonight, then just put a comment below the video and then we will respond to the comment.
Yeah,
I think we solved the problem.
there we go.
Cool. That's it. Thank you very much. See, that's an hour, Cathy. I told you it'd be at least an hour. You were
Yeah.
worried it would be very long.
There you go.
So that leaves me to say thank you so much for that. It's been absolutely fascinating. I look forward to catching up with you again soon. And of course, thank you to our audience. Good evening.